Easy enough to think they can change the world. A new era for community builders is here. Meet Disciple, the perfect community platform for your passion, people, and purpose. Display your unique brand on every device with your brand colors, your logo, and customizable layouts. Connect with others and share what you're most passionate about with posts, polls, live streams, events, videos, blogs, photos, and private folders to store your content. Power up engagement with private messaging, scheduled content, unlimited reach, push notifications, and unlimited groups. Create an income from doing what you love with paid for content and subscriptions. Your community is in safe hands with data privacy, zero algorithms, and data analytics. We'll support with your growth every step of the way through our customer community, The Collective. Get access to expert live streams, mentorship, community building resources, and connect with other community leaders. Get all these benefits and more with a Disciple-powered community platform. Because sometimes you have to create what you want to be a part of. Join our movement of leaders, experts, and change makers today. Disciple. We take your community as seriously as you do.
Hello, everybody. We are back with a super exciting and super special expert live stream today. As you can see, I'm joined here by the CEO of Meetup, David Siegel, which is just, you can see the smile on my face, guys. I'm very excited. In a minute, I'm going to hand over to David himself so he can do a quick introduction. As you know, I'm Nicolette. I'm I'm head of community and brand here at Disciple. And so, yeah, I'll be hosting things in the background today. So if you have any questions or anything, feel free to stick them in the chat and we'll make sure David gets back to everything. Saying that, we will be running a giveaway today as well. So if you ask a question live in the chat, you'll be entered into a chance to win one of 10 books that we're giving away. That is David Siegel's own book, Decide and Conquer. That's it. That's the goodie. Valentina's also got a copy that she's been reading herself through, and it's a brilliant book. So ask a question, get yourself a book. David, over to you.
It's good to see you, and thank you, Disciple, and thank you for the opportunity. I'm really excited about any questions that people have. We have a very short few slides just to get the conversation going. Hopefully most people know Meetup, but we're the world's largest platform for finding and building community with 257,000 communities and 59 million members of our community. So I'm looking forward to any and all questions that people have. So it should be fun.
Incredible, amazing. Thank you so much. So yeah, I'm going to hand over the floor to you. Feel free to get your slides going and people get your questions in. This is a once in a lifetime opportunity. So yeah, enjoy it, everyone.
Once in a lifetime. You heard it here. Hopefully many more times than once in a lifetime. So the first question I just want to ask, because I always frankly learn a lot from hearing of people's Meetup experiences, is anyone here ever been to a Meetup? And if so, take a second, put into chat in any platform that you're on of a type of group that you happen to have gone to. Were you in a tech group? In what city were you in that group? Were you in a outdoors group? The biggest sector for us prior to the pandemic was actually tech. And then once the pandemic started, it started evolving. And we had enormous numbers of people playing outdoors, pickleball and tennis and others. So if you have any, love to hear any examples of Meetup groups that you've ever been a part of or attended would be fun to start with. And then what we're going to do today while you're typing is we're going to go through. There we go. Okay. Hiking in Maryland by Dominique. I'm glad to hear that you did that. Thank you for sharing that, Dominique. Hopefully that was awesome. Looks like David has been to a soccer Meetup group. Very important. When I was evaluating whether or not to take the job at Meetup, I actually visited a soccer Meetup group in Brooklyn, New York. And I met this guy from Germany. And he said to me, he used to play soccer all the time. And he really relied on that soccer group to build his friends and his relationships. He was new to the city. He didn't know anyone. And when he started going to that soccer group, of course, he called it football, which is, of course, what it should be called, perhaps. He started going to that soccer group. It like changed his life. They all play soccer and then go to a pub afterwards. And it was just incredibly meaningful for him. So, David, I'm glad that you've gone to soccer meetup group. Elliot's been to a Cincinnati startup group. And Tiffany has been to women's hiking group. And Lauren's been to a New York City girls foodie group. Okay. Thank you, Lauren, Tiffany, Elliot, David, and Dominique for all the different meetup groups that you're listing out. Obviously, a huge variety in terms of startups and hiking and foodie stuff and all the other areas that people are sharing. So we're going to get started. As the CEO of Meetup, first thing I want to share is a little bit about the story of Meetup's founding. We were founded directly because of and right after 9/11. Most people don't know that. Our founder, Scott Heiferman, who founded the company a little over 20 years ago. And in fact, the site meetup.com went live on June 14th, 2002. So in 7 days from now is going to be our 20th anniversary. So what happened was, after 9/11, as many of you remember, we were all kind of in just a state of total fog and confusion. He went down to his lobby and he met someone. And he said, "Hey, what floor do you live on?" And the person said, "I live on the 5th floor." And he said, "Wait, I live on the same floor? How come we have never met before? You must have just moved in." "No, I've been living here for, a number of years." And they met someone else who also lived on the floor he hadn't met. And he said, "It shouldn't take tragedy to build community." And it was that idea that he went back to his home upstairs and he took out a white paper, big whiteboard, and he started writing an idea of how do you build community for people when it's not because of tragedy, but because of something positive. And a lot of the concepts he put on this whiteboard of finding different towns or locations around different topics and organizing around events are the framework for how Meetup is actually today. And it all comes from this white page that you see right over here in front of you. And then interestingly, when it first launched, and this is kind of crazy, the area that had the most groups, believe it or not, on Meetup was witches. There were more witches groups than any other type of group. There are 442 witches groups, which kind of tells you that when you're building community, you don't know what's going to happen. You're going to start with some kind of an idea, just like any kind of business or entrepreneurial venture. And it's going to morph and change into something that you never would have expected, but it's about listening to your groups, listening to what's working and what's not working. Today, witches is not the biggest number on Meetup, but at the time in 2002, we had more witches groups than any other area, which is kind of interesting. The big acceleration happened in 2004 when there was a little-known senatorial candidate in the state of Illinois who said, anyone who gets over, I think, 500 people to come to my Meetup group, I will show up, whether it's a farm in rural Illinois, doesn't matter. And who was that person that ended up kind of really putting Meetup on the map? It was Barack Obama. Barack Obama then became senator, and he used Meetup as a platform to help to build community around kind of his candidacy and then ultimately senatorial and then presidency. The reason why Meetup and community is so important is because of the loneliness epidemic. 46% of people regularly, not sometimes, not occasionally, but regularly feel lonely. And among people who are Gen Zers, that number, people who are 18 to 25 years old, let's say, that number is 62% of people regularly feel lonely, which is terrifying. And oh, by the way, this is prior to the pandemic. So the work that people are doing in community is very important, but the work that people are doing, especially around people in their 20s and 30s, is possibly, I would say, even more important. 25% of people don't even have not one trusted confidant to go to in a time of need. And then, as I said, there's Meetup, and there's many other communities that you build on different platforms. But we have about 10,000 events every single day. We're now up to 59 million members worldwide, and we're 190 countries around the world, specifically 193 countries. The only country we're not in is North Korea, actually, and it's certainly a source of pride. When the pandemic hit, we saw a massive decrease in our volume, not surprisingly, because the number one reason why we didn't allow a group was we only had in-person groups that were primarily in person. They can have a couple of events that were remote or virtual, but they had to be primarily in-person groups. In fact, we've turned down, prior to the pandemic, millions and millions of dollars from the myriad of organizers who wanted to host virtual-only groups. Well, the pandemic hit, we saw in China, all of our events, 95% evaporate. And then in Northern Italy, evaporate. And we said, what is Meetup's goal? Is Meetup's mission all about in person, or is our mission about staying connected and keeping connected? And the answer was obvious. We're about connections. So we got everyone together. We worked on our tech, on our technology. Within a week, we launched an MVP, a minimum viable product, to be able to enable virtual-only groups, virtual-only events that weren't location-based. And since that time, since the pandemic started, we've had over 5 million online events created. Over 30 million people have attended these online events, and also 190 countries around the world. Last two things I'm going to share, and then we're going to go right into Q&A, because I really want to answer your questions, because me talking at you, not so interesting. Me answering the questions that are on your mind, hopefully much more helpful. So is our values. At Meetup, we have 6 values, and I think they relate to many community platforms, and that's really why I want to share them. The 6 values are the following: trust and transparency. The best and most important thing that community leaders can do is to build trust with their people in their community. If you don't have trust, you don't have anything. And the best way to build trust is through transparency, sharing what's working, sharing what's not working, what's going well, what's not going well. Being as transparent as things as possible drives trust, and trust is a foundation for community. For us at Meetup, focusing on impact, understanding that the most important thing that we could do is not do lots of different things, but focus on a few very important specific things that are as impactful as possible. Same thing with community managers. Sometimes community managers can be distracted, and spend time on 100 different opportunities. Focus drives success. Focus will drive most impact. Not just accepting change is our core value at Meetup, but inviting change, asking people to understanding that change is a positive and it's needed in order to morph a community and to morph a company like Meetup as best as you possibly can. Stepping up. All community managers and leaders are big time step ups. Focus on stepping up. And at Meetup, we talk to our employees, and we have a step up award even, where we say, it's not about your job description. How can you do things above and beyond your job description? And that's how you get the promotion. Do that bigger job, and that's how you get promoted. Next, last two, in no order, elevating people, because people is everything at our company at Meetup, and certainly in community, and leading with integrity, which is essentially fundamental, foundational to everything. If you're not leading with integrity, then you have nothing. As was mentioned, I have a book. It's called Decide and Conquer. If anyone's interested, if they ask a question, they'll be entered in. There's only 10 people that ask questions. Then all 10 of you end up getting a free copy of the book. Woohoo! And if you want to let's get an audio version of the book, then you can scan the thing right here, and you can see an audio copy of the book. And that's really all she wrote. If you want to link in with me, then send me a LinkedIn invite. Here's my email. But I want to just go back to looking at all of you, and let's spend some time talking about, let's see, I'll put this up, this slide. Let's spend time hearing your questions. And it looks like we already have some questions coming in, so that's awesome. Okay, so I will read the question out loud, and we will go from there. Oh, looks like, let's see here. Okay, looks like Tim goes to the DV meetup. Okay, okay. Dominic, thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed the story. In terms of the stats, if you send me an email or you send me a LinkedIn, I'm happy to share those stats with you. Dominic, no problem. Glad the values were helpful. I'm just seeing what people said. Okay, where can you find? Okay, the first question here is, okay, here's a question from Dominic. Thank you, Dominic. What is your advice for how to effectively market community to reach new people? How do you find new people in terms of marketing your community? So first is what I would say, Dominic, to you. It's very easy in the beginning, because especially the US, certainly in the US based mentality, but in the Western based mentality, that bigger is better. But sometimes the most powerful communities, in fact, we've done studies here, the smaller sometimes a community is, it could be 7, 8 people coming to an event versus 100 people coming to an event, the greater that each person gets out of the event. So the first thing I'm going to say, Dominique, is yes, it's very important to market your group and to have people join your group and to build community. But make sure that you don't get overly fixated on the numbers of people that are in your group, and instead you're focused on having an amazing experience, even if it's only a few people at the beginning. And the best way to market it to some extent is like any product or service, which is when people have an amazing experience the first time with a product or a service, those same people are your best marketers. So if you have your first event and there's only 5 people that show up, okay, so how can you turn each of the 5 people that showed up into getting 1 or 2 additional people that they could then bring in? Obviously, there's, you can use social media to market your community, et cetera, but the best possible people to market a community, to reach new people, is the people that are already in your community. So make sure you're starting with that and you're talking to each person, asking them to reach out to their friends, saying to them, can you bring 1 additional person into your group? And what happens then is that you're going to learn and you're going to grow and you're going to get people who are actively like even more engaged in the conversation because and the community, because they came from someone who they know and that they trust. So that's my absolute best way to ultimately market a community. Next question by Louisa Carroll. Here we go. How do you avoid being repetitive on your community in terms of what you ask and how you engage? Okay, so one of the best things that I find community managers do is they go to events from other similar type groups. So let's say you're a group that's focused on entrepreneurs or startup group. So go to a couple of events from other startup groups and see what they're doing. When you're able to, some of the best community organizers on Meetup are members of other groups, and they look at what happens in other groups and they learn from it, and they get re-energized by some of the ideas that people are doing. So in terms of like avoiding repetitiveness, it's a great way to generate new ideas, is to kind of attend other groups. And it doesn't have to be exactly the same. You could be interested in, a knitting group, let's say, and you go to a plant making group and see what they do. But just going to different events, you'll come up with some great ideas. And I think the general philosophy of mine is have as little presentation and as much engagement as you possibly can. So whether it's using apps like Icebreaker, which is an app to help people to break the ice, whether it's using it, especially for virtual breakout rooms, which is extremely important for virtual, and whether it's in person, and finding fun things to do that could facilitate ice breaking again and conversations, really, really helpful for people. So Lisa, hopefully that's helpful. But again, if I had to underline one thing, it's going to other community groups and seeing what they do and learning from them, as opposed to just reading articles, what other people say. Experience it yourself. Okay, Hannah from Guidely asked, what are the top 3 things you recommend community managers focus on in a new virtual community? Okay, so number 1 is, I would say, purpose. So what do I mean by that? And this is true for virtual and in person, but I'm a deep believer that the communities where the community manager feels a deep intrinsic connection and a purpose to what is happening, those are the ones that drive resilience. Those are the ones that people go above and beyond. So here's an example. A friend of mine in Houston is a breast cancer survivor, thank God. And she decided that she wanted to devote as much of her free time to helping other women in the Houston area to be supported, understand other treatments that are available besides the standard chemotherapy, etc. And she has a purpose. She has a purpose beyond. And her community, whether it started small, but she's resilient and she is patient and she understands that it takes time. And so having a purpose in terms of one of the most important things I would say focused for a virtual community is very valuable. The second thing for virtual community, for a new virtual community is, I do tend to believe that if there is even one small opportunity for in-person, if it's a full virtual community and you could just have once a year to try to get together in person, it could be truly transformative. I don't think communities have to be in person. They certainly can be virtual, but the power of just one time, once a year, getting together, people flying in or people even just driving in that are close by, can transform a virtual community and transform relationships in a community. And I recommend that, as well. Even for all virtual, if it's possible to have one time a year just to have in person, it could transform in person. It can transform the community. Next thing I would say in terms of top items for a virtual specific community is something I referenced earlier, which is as zero presentations as possible. Like finding as many ways to get participation. So one of the things I like to do is, there's a facilitator who might facilitate the conversation, but then there's another person whose entire task is assigned to getting people to engage and sending like little chat messages and getting other people to engage further and to chime in and to give their opinions or share an experience or to share a story. So in virtual, if you have different roles for different people, one person's role might be facilitating the conversation. Another person's role might be just getting people to engage, which is different than the person who's doing the actual facilitation, in front of everyone. Thinking through different roles that could actually help each person is very important for virtual. Okay, next one, Erica Broom. What are your best practices to ensure people are excited about online events or actually turn up to them? Okay, so number one is right prior to the event. First of all, online events have a lower show-up rate oftentimes than in-person events. And this is what we've seen. Even though you think it's easier to come to an online event, it's also easier to say, oh, it's an online event, I'll RSVP and I'll go, and then people don't show up. So it's important to be cognizant of the fact that for in-person events, people are going to be thinking, can I make it that day? Does it work? Does it work on my calendar? Do I have time to get there? Do I have time to get back? There's a little more forethought that goes into whether or not someone's time. For online event, oftentimes people are just like, yep, I'll go. And then if they don't go, no one maybe knows, it's not a big deal. So oftentimes we do see lower show-up rates for online events. So it's a really good question, Erica, that you're asking. In terms of what you could do. So number one is one day before the event, make sure you send a reminder to as many different people as possible. People forget. It's extremely easy to forget and to send the reminder. I oftentimes also try to send something out to people like 15 minutes beforehand, 30 minutes beforehand. Just a reminder, like people need, I hate to say babysitting, but the amount of reminders and almost babysitting you have to do for online events to remind people to show up, it's frustrating. And that's why having a higher purpose is so important for what people are doing. And it takes a tremendous amount of resiliency in terms of pushing hard to get through, like when only a few people show up, but the reminders make an enormous difference. The other thing that I like doing for online events is giving some kind of a giveaway, like we're doing in this one. It's an incentive. And if you have someone speaking, say, one person will get a copy of a book or one person will get XYZ, whatever that thing happens to be, a free subscription to something. It just engages people in a different kind of way. The last thing I'll say is, to the extent that your community can help to provide input into what the content is for an event, it just builds more buy-in. So for example, prior to an event, a lot of times I like sending a message out saying, so I'm an organizer of a meetup group. It's on entrepreneurship. And a lot of times prior to the event, I will send out a note saying, what are the most interesting things that you're most interested in learning about? And we'll do a poll, and then we'll see what people are most interested in. There's just, what that drives is a little more ownership of ultimately, what the topic is. And last thing I'll say around or can people show up is there's all these different roles that you can give to people. If you give different roles to different people, there's going to be a higher likelihood they're going to show up because they feel that they have a different thing that they're responsible for doing. One person is going to introduce the person maybe who's speaking. One person is going to give a wrap up. One person is going to be part of the Q&A. Another person. So just think through how you could distribute as many different roles to people, and higher likelihood they'll actually then show up to the event again and attend. Okay, Elliot asked the question, how do you get through the cold start problem? So the cold start problem, for those who don't know, is essentially when you're starting from ground zero and you have to build something up, how do you just get those first few people? So, at Meetup, what we do is we have this group of 50 million plus people that we market the event to. So right when people start, they might have 5, or they might have 50, or might have 100, people that are in their group. And that helps them go from 0 to something. Because once you have something, it's a lot easier to go. It's a lot harder to go from nothing to something than it is, to start with a number of people in the group. But what I try to do also for cold starts, if you're not using Meetup, you're using a different platform, which is all perfectly fine, is to invite people to be leadership, to be leaders in the community, and to say, okay, we're going to have an initial board of 5 founding community leaders. And if you label people as kind of community founders, then again, there's a different sense of ownership that people will have in terms of the cold start problem, and they'll be really a part of that community in the beginning. So people appreciate sometimes being called a community founder, and then treating them truly as a community founder, not just calling them that. Okay, David at the Blue, assume a lot of information about people that join groups. I assume, okay. A lot of information with people that join. Are there common characteristics people that join and see value in groups? Yeah, there are. Here's a couple. So number one, oftentimes what I've seen the most at Meetup, I can only talk about Meetup, so you'll have to excuse the biased example, but we just happen to have so many different groups. It hopefully isn't overly biased. But one commonality that I've seen is people who tend to be more introverted in many ways find Meetup as a platform and other community groups to be incredibly valuable. Why? Because they don't want to go to a bar. And that's how they meet people, by going to a bar or other ways of meeting people. They have a unique passion. They have a passion for horror shows. They have a passion for whatever the passion, rock climbing, whatever the passion happens to be. And they don't want to go the traditional route of kind of building relationships. And they might even be less comfortable. So I actually do find that many of the times that people are the biggest kind of get the most out of it, and oftentimes our leaders is they might have a little bit be more introverted actually in the beginning, and Meetup or another community platform helps to get them out of it. The other thing that I found super common in groups, especially at Meetup, is when people have just recently moved to a new city. When people move, their interest in meeting new people is dramatically higher than if someone has been in the same place. Besides moving, that's the number one reason why I think people oftentimes join a Meetup group is, I just moved to Edinburgh and I don't know anyone, and it's a great way to meet people. But also time stages. So when people had just had a child, when someone just quit their job, when someone is looking to start a new company, when someone just got divorced, when someone just started having children and wants to join parenting groups, each of those life milestones are the best times, depending on what your group happens to be. Someone just graduated, for example, from college and now is in a new city or in the same city and doesn't have that college infrastructure. And anytime that there is a major life milestone, that is oftentimes a characteristic of people that join a group. I would say the life milestone stage and people who tend to be more introverted and don't want to go this common path of how people end up meeting others. Okay, great question. Sangha, got lots of great questions. I'm loving this. Sangha asked, what are your thoughts about hybrid events? Okay, Sangha, I do have thoughts about this, and it probably just differs from most people, but hey, hopefully, my word is not the absolute truth. It's just my opinion. I believe deeply, Sangha, in Katerina Henriquez Sangha, excuse me, Katerina. I believe deeply, Katerina, in hybrid groups. I don't actually believe as much in hybrid events. Let me explain what I mean. I believe that possibly the best groups are hybrid groups, meaning that the group has in-person events and also remote events. It's great to have virtual events because then you could get more people. It's easier to join. You can have them potentially more often. You don't have to go to places. And then in person obviously has a ton of value too. But what I found is when a event attempts to have an amazing in-person experience and also have an amazing experience for those that are remote, someone suffers significantly. And of course, there's technology out there, and there's lots of different technology by Bevy and Hopin and all these other places that can create great hybrid event scenarios. I just don't. I think someone ultimately ends up always loses out, and is ultimately frustrated by the experience. I would rather, and there's a lot of energy and time that gets put into creating this amazing hybrid event. I'd rather say, and I know it sounds great to say all events should be hybrid, but in practice, I would rather community organizers say, this is an in-person focus, this is a online focus, and kind of leave it at that. I'm a teacher also. I teach at Columbia. And when I taught remotely, it was a great experience for people, and they used chat, and it was great, and we were very focused on that. When I taught in person, great experience. When you try to teach, for example, hybrid, and some people are in person and some people are remote, and the tools aren't really there, and it was I think it was a lose for both. It was a lose-lose. That's my general opinion, Katerina. And again, it's not a popular opinion, but it is my opinion. I'd rather people just focus on one or the other and make it great for that reason. Okay. Tiffany Keenan wrote that she offers seasonal workshops teaching nutrition through gardening. That's pretty cool. And hope to use Meetup for these soon. What's the best way to encourage consistent carryover among participants? Okay, so that reminds me of just, Tiffany, what the most important thing is in community. Community is based on a combination of two things. One is some of the same people going from one event to another event to another event. Because if it's new people every time, that's not a community. That's just a bunch of new people going to something. That's not a community. But it's also not a community in my mind, Tiffany. I'll still answer your question. If it's the same people at event one, then the same exact people in two, then the same exact people in three, and there's no new blood. Because when you have new people coming into a community, it's so energizing for all parties. So the ideal community is one where, whatever, it's 75%, let's say, of the same people coming in, but then 10, 20, 25, 30% new people coming in every single time. So your question is, what's the best way to encourage carryover among participants? I think the answer is have an amazing experience, obviously, but it's not about just the event. It's about building relationships between people. Somehow finding a way in your event to get people to get to know each other one-on-one or two-on-one in a smaller group, because the famous saying is people come for the content, but they stay for the people. They come for the content, they stay for the people. So if you want people to keep staying and coming back, it's always because of the people. It's always because of the people that people keep coming back. So you could tweak the content, have great content, etc. But if you're not building relationships between people, it's not going to matter. Try to find ways of building relationships so they're like, oh, Fred, long time no see. Dominique, haven't seen you in a while. What's going on? And give that kind of an outlet for people to build real connections. The Blue Witches was David. The Blue Witches were the largest category. David the Blue, sorry. Witches were the largest category in the early days of Meetup. What's the largest category today? So the largest category for us is not witches. The largest category for us at Meetup is actually, it depends on how you look at things, but The greatest number of RSVPs is still in tech for us, but the largest, fastest growing category for us in groups is around self-help, is around meditation. It's around yoga. Because of the pandemic, happiness studies and discussing happiness and positive psychology, we're seeing over 2x growth, 3x growth, sometimes 10x growth in every area related to self-help, positive psychology, meditation. It just speaks to people's loneliness and need for community and burnout and stress. So we're seeing those groups. Also support groups, sadly, or maybe not sadly, but they're also over double on Meetup than they were prior to the pandemic. So parents of ADHD kids support group, or you name the type of children of Alzheimer parents. It could be anything. We have very niche types of support groups, but support groups are double what they were prior to the pandemic. And again, it says about some of the challenges that people are facing in this world. So we're seeing growth there. And then hiking is just going through the roof for us because it's outdoors. Again, during the pandemic, so many people wanted to do that. Okay, next question here. How do you protect the Meetup brand from dangerous or off-brand type of meetups being started using your platform? I'm working on launching chapters in other states, but how can I protect the overall brand without making things so rigid? Okay. So for us, probably the most important thing in our brand is being able to stand for trust and safety. Meaning we have kicked out, and this is really important as community leaders. If someone is a bad actor and is acting inappropriately, someone hitting on women inappropriately, or saying inappropriate things, or whatever people might do, sharing inappropriate photos or information, you need to have the right systems in place to quickly kick people off the platform and out of the community. It's complicated to do so. That's why it's so important to have a set protocol of here's what's allowed and here's what's not allowed in a group. So we've invested tens of millions of dollars in different technology and different people, and making sure that bad actors and people who are acting inappropriately or are dangerous, as you said, Dominic, in some way, that we find ways of them. We inform them of what happened, and we don't really get into a negotiation. I'm sorry, you're no longer going to be able to be part of this community. And sometimes it leads to a lot of frustration, but I think the safety of people is so extraordinarily high that you need to have safety in your community, because the best groups are groups where people are vulnerable, can be their authentic selves, can be who they are. And if they in any way feel that they're not safe in being who they are, or something being recorded, or who knows what, then everything falls apart. That's why trust is so important. So I would say over skew on trust and safety within your group. So in terms of protecting the brand and not making it so rigid, that's a good question. I would say, Dominique, that in the beginning, it's important to share what you stand for. And part of what you stand for is saying these things are acceptable and these things are not acceptable. And if that means being rigid, that's okay. Over time, you'll learn more and you could potentially be more flexible. But I think it's important to stick to what you stand for, who you are. And if that means that a couple of people are not the right fit, then you have to be comfortable doing that and not just kind of bend to every person's whim. So I'd rather you be more rigid and have a true brand, because it'll make for a better experience for everyone. And it doesn't have to be bigger. It just has to be a great experience. David, we are Chamba. Excuse me if I'm not pronouncing that correctly. This is from Corina Hierro on LinkedIn. David, we are Chamba. We connect companies with Latinx workforces in the US. Cool. I'm the community manager. I deal with two different audiences. How do I separate languages in these communities within the same startup? Woo! That is not easy. Okay, so I'm glad you asked the question. So here's what I would say. So number one, I would find a path to somehow having three separate type kind of discussion groups. One is English only, one is Spanish only, and one is English and Spanish. And then, this is really important, have some kind of a moderator. When someone publishes something in one versus another that's particularly interesting or thoughtful, because if you have it all in one big group, it's going to be kind of a mess, and it will detract from the overall experience. But at the same time, if you keep it totally siloed, then people aren't going to be able to learn from each other. So have someone's role in the community to be reviewing what is written in Spanish, translating it into English, and then sharing it on the English one, seeing what's in English, translating Spanish. Not every single post, of course, but the posts that are the most thoughtful, the ones that are most potentially impactful and helpful for others, share those selectively so that people could get from that experience and learn from each other's experience. Because I think that too often language is such a barrier, but it doesn't have to be if you have someone whose job it is and their role is within the community to help to share things between people. That's the first. And the second is, I can't tell you what the best language tools happen to be because I don't know them, so I apologize. But I imagine that I think every single event has to be closed captioning, so meaning you have words on the bottom, ideally in both languages. So even if someone doesn't speak the language perfectly, they can still at least follow along in translations on the bottom of kind of what's working, what's not working, and what people can understand and what not. So if you're able to have both English and Spanish kind of on the bottom ticker, that could be very, very helpful too. And it could be someone's role if there's no technology. Someone's speaking in English, someone's typing away in the comments kind of in Spanish, what's happening during that time. So I guess my overall message to you, Karina, would be find specific people whose roles it is to help to remove the barrier around language and make it easier for people who are attending events to understand them from both perspectives, or understand people who are putting things in platforms to understand it from both sides as well. Okay, Jamie Lee Bunton on LinkedIn. You have a question about internal community building. Great. So, and that's a great question. We're at the end of the pandemic. There's a trend to move workforces to remote first. Yes, there is. In fact, if you look at Brian Chesky, who is the founder and CEO of Airbnb, he basically said all employees can work from anywhere. And the opposite of that, of course, is Elon Musk, who said you're going to be fired unless you come back into the office. So going back to Jamie's question, how does online meeting exhaustion impact team building in this scenario? How important is it to keep putting water cooler meetings on the schedule? Okay. So in my mind, the Great Resignation is happening in the United States. 4.5 million people every single month are resigning from their jobs. And the number one reason why they are resigning is because there's a lack of community at work, as people are no longer, in their offices and building relationships with each other and going for lunches and coffees with each other. So the question is, how important it is to have some kind of water cooler meetings in the schedule? Very, very, very important. But I would say it's not good enough to have them be just online all the time. What we're doing at Meetup is, since we saved a lot of dollars in real estate and office space, we're paying people to fly in more often than we did before. We have a once a month semi-mandatory meeting where everyone not needs to fly in, but if you're within the New York metro area, you need to come into that meeting and be there. Free breakfast for everyone, free lunch for people. And we use food and the lure of food to get people to come back in person and have those meetings. So I would say the best thing is to find ways of periodically getting together for employees, and not just kind of relying on online only type relationships, because people will just leave too quickly if they do. Next question by Katarina. With so many groups that meet up about similar subjects, what's your advice on how to stand out from the crowd? So I think that photos and video are incredibly important in marketing a group to stand out from the crowd. The description is going to be the description is going to be the description. You're going to have a description of an event or description of a group, and they're probably going to look one similar to another. not that different, and people aren't going to get excited about it. How do you build excitement? You show photos from previous events. You show videos from previous events. The ability, when people see those photos and they say, that's what I want to be a part of, that's what gets people oftentimes excited. So the standout to me occurs much more in imagery and videos than like copy that you might have in terms of that. The other thing is getting some decent big names, someone that people have heard of, to potentially speak at an event. If you're able to get someone who's not crazy well known, but someone well known in a circle, that's always a big draw. But I would say, assuming if you can't get that, then the best thing you could probably do is have amazing photography and video. And just like I talked about earlier, keep messaging people for, right beforehand, just reminding them to show up, and they will. But people just need reminders. People, there's oftentimes a big disconnect, Katerina, as you know, between what people want to do and what they really need to do. And people all want to come to events. They just need to be reminded to do so oftentimes. Okay, David asked, what's the most interesting and surprising thing you learned about community since joining Meetup? I would say that, and hopefully this is an exaggeration, but Meetup does, but community saves people's lives. And that's a strong statement. It saves them sometimes physically, but it also, I'll tell you a story of someone I know named Omar Acosta. He was sitting at home, depressed. He lives in Fort Worth, Texas, playing video games 10, 12 hours a day, every day. And his family was worried about him. His brother said to him, please find a community. He happened to have gone and meet up. He went to our first event, and after the first event, he was like, okay, I'll go back to the second one. After the fifth event, it was a rock climbing group. After the fifth event, the organizer left and said, I'm moving to a new city. Can you become the leader of this group? He was sitting around watching just videos, games all the time. Since he became the leader of the group, he's had 900 events. And I kid you not, in terms of surprise, 6 marriages have come from his group. It's not even a singles group. So I guess my biggest surprise is serendipity. It's almost the surprise of being surprised and having these amazing serendipitous moments happen, that somehow I joined a kickball group, let's say, and as a good friend of mine did, and met his significant other from that kickball group. I joined a hiking group, and I met the co-founder for my company. The other surprise I'll just tell you, David, is the incredible overlap of the personal and the professional. Meaning, so often people think, oh, I'm going to go to a networking group event, and that's professional, or a career group, and that's professional. But they can meet their best friends in that group. So here's another story, actually. I met a meetup organizer in San Mateo, California, and he said, David, I have 2 groups. One is a bowling group. The other group that I have is a networking group. One was professional, one was personal. He's like, I got my last 2 jobs from my bowling group, and I met like one of my best friends at the professional group. So I guess my biggest surprise is sometimes the personal can turn to professional, and sometimes the professional can turn to personal, and you just never know. And that's one of the beautiful serendipitous things that happens from community. That's what I would say, David. Jamie Lee Bunton from LinkedIn asks, as a team building routine, are they annoying, getting in the way of real work, or vital? I don't know what they is per se, but I would say, Jamie, that team building experiences that are BS, where people fall back and have to catch each other, some ridiculous stuff like that, are just more frustrations for most people. The best team building is when people can be open and honest and vulnerable with each other about what's working and what's not working in a team. So there's a book that I have every one of my executive teams read. And by the way, every community manager should read this book too. It's not my book. My book's good. This book's great. It's called 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And if you haven't read it, it's a very powerful book about team dynamics and team dysfunctionality. And I have all my teams always read it and then talk about how is our team, dysfunctional? What could we change? And then I have each person go around the room and say, here's what I bring to the team in a positive way, and here's how I detract from a team. Here are the things that I bring to a team that actually make the team worse. When people can talk about that, it's so powerful to be able to be in that kind of an environment. So that's what I would say. I would say that a team building, we can really talk about what's working and not working. You can debrief. That's very powerful. When it's just a bunch of like, obstacle courses or whatever, it doesn't really do anything. Okay, next question here. What advice would you give to someone who is feeling overwhelmed and burnt out from building their community? What a very important question, because community organizers frequently feel overwhelmed and burnt out from community building, because in many ways it's a thankless job. It's not really a thankless job, because at times people do go to you and say, like, you see the impact that you're having on someone. There's a person named David Good. He sent me an email. His mother had passed away, and at Meetup we sent him flowers. And he said that when his mother was in the hospital, the people that he was surrounded by were people in his Meetup community. So it's not always a thankless job, but oftentimes it is. So what's the advice? So number one is make sure you have a partner in crime. If you're doing it all yourself, if you're the primary person, if you don't have a co-leader, if you don't have a board, a group of people that are a leadership group in your community, it's going to be much more difficult to succeed. And at times you might need to take a step back and have someone else in that community board take a step forward. And you should call that out and you should tell them. But any community where you're the one person, you're the single point of failure, is a community that may not exist in the future. And you don't want that. So build it just like as a leader, as a CEO, I need to build a leadership team around me that's strong. And then Meetup can be strong. Well, as a community leader, you need to build people around you. And I know a lot of community leaders have a very set way of doing things. Sometimes it's hard for them to be part of, this group collective, and it might take longer, but I can't emphasize enough. Communities succeed when there's strong leadership teams, not just a leader that are leading the community. So when you feel burnt out, rely on that leadership team to step up. You step back, you maybe go to some events outside, and then it'll be easy for you to step back into a leadership role as well. That's what I would say. Next question. If there's a magic pill to increase community engagement, what would you wish it did? I would say the magic pill would be for anyone who truly wants to go to something, not to be lazy about it, and to actually go and show up. Because I know for myself, a lot of times I have these amazing events that I want to attend, and I look at them on my calendar, I'm like, oh, maybe I'll go next time. And it's just a magic pill would be the pill to prevent procrastination. That would be a magic pill. No procrastination, do it now. And that would change community, because so many people procrastinate. There's also a magic pill around fear and anxiety that exists in community. The number of people that I've spoken to who say they've driven up to a Meetup event, they're in their car and they see people coming in, walking in, and they can't get out of their car, especially people who are very introverted, and they turn back. And that's so sad. But I think the courage, a magic pill to give people courage to attend an event for the first time, even if they don't know anyone, that would be my second magic pill. Attend an event a first time, even if you don't know anyone. That would be my next magic pill. Okay. What's your best hiring tips for choosing the best talent? Okay, so in this book, Decide and Conquer, which, hopefully Jay and others will get a free copy of. So, hey, that's great. I talk a lot about kind of hiring in terms of building community. I would say the number one tip I give is never ask for references. It's like, never ask for references. How do you know if the person is strong or not strong? Here's why. References are kind of, again, BS. Anyone could come up with one or two or three people that can, give you a positive reference. It could be, the worst people in the world can find two or three people that can give them positive references. I don't do any reference checking for hiring, for talent building, etc. I try to back channel everyone. So on LinkedIn, I look at who's connected to this person. I try to then ask anyone who might be connected to this person, because LinkedIn, everything's visible, to to tell me about the person, whether they're strong or less strong, and how strong the person is, and what are they great at, what are they less great at. But I would focus on back channeling when it comes to talent, much more so than reference checking. And that's because here's the thing, interviewing is very hard way to understand whether someone's going to be successful or not. But if someone actually worked with someone for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, they know. Half an hour, I can't figure it out. But if they worked for someone for many years, I want to talk to the people that worked for people, for many years. That's how I'm going to learn the most in terms of hiring. I recently got a partner in crime. Oh, good, Lauren. After a year of running my community, and woo, the best ever. Lauren, good for you. I'm so happy for you that you did that. It's so important to get that. Okay, next question. So I have a podcast called Keep Connected. Great title, right? You can check it out. Any other podcasts? So the other podcast that I'm obsessed with is not a community podcast, but I'm still going to say it anyway because it's a freaking great podcast. Is No Stupid Questions. I don't know if anyone here has listened to it, but it's with two people. It's with Stephen Dubner from Freakonomics and Angela Duckworth from Grit. She wrote Grit, and it's kind of a blend of psychology, business, and behavioral science, and it goes into questions around, Malcolm Gladwell-esque questions around like what motivates people to do what they do around a variety of different topics. And I find them to be incredibly entertaining, research-driven, and I'm big fans of the two of them. So No Stupid Questions is a great podcast. I've listened to every single episode of No Stupid Questions. So highly recommend that one. Okay, it's 12:57. Let's see, do we have one last question? Let's see. I would just say to everyone, my last message is the following, which is one of the most ingredients in being a community leader is optimism, and it's having a positive outlook. Because when you're a community leader, a lot is on your shoulders. Make sure, like I've said, to ask for help. Don't just ask for help from leaders, ask for help from people who just are showing up. Because guess what? When people show up, they want to help, but oftentimes no one gives them the opportunity to help. And what I found is that the great thing about community is not just the diversity of community, but the earnest interest in trying to continue to build the community and for it to sustain. So don't put it on your shoulders. Find ways of getting each person to step up, like we mentioned at the beginning in the values, and find ways for each of those people to help others. That's what I would say. And for those interested in, the topic around decision making and how to make smarter decisions, that's something that is a real passion of mine, what I wrote the book about. So if you do check it out, I hope you'll give me any feedback about what resonated, what didn't resonate. And I just wanted to thank your disciple and everyone for this opportunity to, learn from each of you and hear from your questions. And I hope it was in any way helpful for you as well. Elliot, thank you for saying such nice comments. Elliot Benny. And David the Blue, I see in your comments as well. Really appreciate it. And I think the funny thing about asking for help is that you're giving people an opportunity to be happy. When people can help others, it gives people joy. And it gives the person who's asking for help joy, and it gives the person who's providing help joy. So just keep doing that, and good things will come. Glad you enjoyed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. This was utterly incredible. Every single little question that you answered was I was just eating it up. I think I've written down 1,000,001 notes. So thank you for your time and your energy. Thank you to all our attendees for showing up and engaging with us and throwing all your amazing questions through as well. We will be announcing the winners of the books in the collective early next week. So keep an eye out for that, and fingers crossed you win.
Have a wonderful, healthy, rewarding, meaningful day, everyone. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.